Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today we're going to be going over Oberon. Now, obviously there's a lot to be said about Oberon, but I feel like I can't talk about him without first talking about the fact that Oberon is coming to us as a pretender. This is our first new class in the game in 3.5 years. And for a long period in time, there were a lot of people that really just felt like we weren't going to get another class for very obvious reasons. Now, a lot of people assumed that this was actually going to be Beast, and interestingly enough, we ended up getting Pretender instead, but we did get Beast here now on JP even years after this. So this has been a very interesting thing, but let's very quickly here run and talk about Pretender. So Pretender as a class comes to us as an interesting sort of addition to the game. This is your alter ego, but for the knight classes instead. So again, the way this one's going to work is it's going to have a base damage multiplier of 1 times. It's going to have a base star gen rate of 20%, a base star absorption of 100%, and a base death rate of 30%. And the way to think about this is, Pretenders end up having 1.5 times class advantage against the entire knight triangle of units, so again, Saber, Lancer, and Archer, and end up taking neutral damage back from them. So they are not resistant to the knight classes, nor are they super effective. They're just normally effective. They're half effective, kind of, is the way to think about it. From there, their actual true niche is against alter egos, where they're actually 2 times effective against them. That's what they're really good at. And furthermore, they are also going to get extra damage from fighting against foreigners. They're going to do less damage to a foreigner and take more damage from a foreigner. So that is their true kryptonite, and that also helps round out the whole foreigner side of things, since foreigners had always been a class that dealt extra damage to themselves in a sort of cyclical relationship, and really only were resistant against berserkers as their one real claim to fame. So this allows Foreigner to now instead have a true niche against sort of Pretender over here, and it really helps that out. And so now you have a true triangle here between Pretender, Alter Ego, and again Foreigner here, as Foreigner will kill Foreigner will kill Pretender, Pretender will kill Alter Ego, and Alter Ego will kill Foreigner, and Foreigner will loop back and kill itself. So it is an interesting thing nonetheless, but it sort of bared worth mentioning that yes, Pretenders are going to be a new thing in the game. And again, I'm not going to talk about the lore or anything behind that because I don't want to get into potential story spoilers, but I will obviously say that there have only been 5 Pretenders since then. And this is an important thing because Oberon is an AoE buster Pretender. And why that matters is, again, you have Hephaestion who comes out next, who is a single target. You have Lady Avalon who comes down the line, who is a support arts caster. Well, not a caster, but a pretender. And then you end up having 9 Tattoo Dragon Eliza from not this upcoming Halloween, but the next Halloween after that, who is another AoE buster, okay? And then you end up having Tlaloc that ends up being, again, another, like, AoE quick pretender. So they're each different in their own right. The closest overlap that you can say is really with Eliza, and Eliza is A, welfare, and B, totally oriented towards herself in that regard. So Oberon is a much more beneficial unit to have, since Oberon can be your AoE, and Oberon can also be a support for you. In fact, that is what we're going to talk about a lot here. And if you guys really want to see me go in depth as to like party comps and stuff that you can form with Oberon, I highly recommend checking out my Buster guide. As again, I did a tier list, so to speak, on the entire Buster system involving Koyan Sky and Oberon. Make sure you guys check that video out because I explain the sort of setups that you're going to want to think about whenever you're using Oberon. But we'll go ahead and actually go through his kit now and give you guys a better idea. Now again, Oberon is a limited 5-star servant, so just keep that in mind. The big issue that you're going to have with him in terms of banner availability is he's probably coming up here, and the reason I'm making this video now is so that it's out in time if we need it. Oberon could be coming to us as soon as the 10th here with the release of 6.3. However, every other server other than Korea ended up having Oberon actually come out a week after the release of 6.3, where instead they kind of waited a little bit and then gave you the Oberon banner. Now, Korea had it right away. And the reason is because they're on an accelerated schedule. However, Korea also had a unique change to the Koyanskaya banner that lumped in a lot of the 4-star Lancers with her. The only other server that ever got that for Koyanskaya's banner is us. We got that here on NA. So there is a possibility that we would also mirror Korea for the release of Oberon. But don't hold your breath. If it happens, it happens. Be ready for it on the 10th. However, again, it's still entirely possible, and I'm going to say probably likely that it happens on the 17th, like we're predicting. Still, I wanted to make sure I had this guide out for you guys. So let's go ahead and talk about his kit here. So, and actually, one other point there real quick. The big thing to point out about this is Oberon's banner. If you don't get him, if you miss him, the only problem that you're going to have is that Oberon does not reappear for 18 months. He basically does not come back until December of next year. And where that ends up happening is it's part of the like Road to 7 sort of preparation for Lost Belt 7 type stuff, as he ends up getting a banner there right before then. So you're going to be wading through a lot of 90++ content. You're going to be going through a lot of potential like raids, a lot of potential lottos and stuff without Oberon, if that's the case. So just keep in mind that that is going to be the potential of what will happen to you if you don't roll him here. Again, I can certainly say that it's not something that you need to be super worked up over. If you don't get Oberon, it's not the end of the world. You can certainly make do without him. However, I will say that he will make your life a lot easier, and that's what we're going to go through and talk about here. So now actually starting with the kit here. So taking a look right here, he's got 11.8k attack power. This isn't up into the 12k range, but I'm not going to say that this is super worrisome. It's still a little bit low, but I think it makes sense for a unit that is as powerful as the support as Oberon is. What I will say is concerning is, while he doesn't have the best attack, he does not have good HP. That is something you're going to be really concerned with on him. And yeah, I've actually had Oberon just get like single crit down and immediately killed. And that's something you're going to have to watch out for. It just really depends on what you're facing. Doubly so if it's something like a Berserker or, you know, heaven forbid, a Foreigner, if you're taking him against something like that. Just keep that in mind and be careful if you need to get into a situation where you want to protect him. That being said, you probably shouldn't. You probably won't want to be using Oberon too much outside of a like 3-turn type of system, and I'll explain that more as we get deeper into his kit. Oberon ends up being an Earth attribute unit. He has 104 star absorption, so again a little bit higher than the 100 stated base value, and then 20.5, so again a little bit higher than the stated base value. And as you guys can see here, he ends up having 0.59 NP charge rate. That is at least going to be somewhat concerning, but probably in the grand scheme of things, not. I'm going to say this is only going to really come into play if you're having to card with him, which you might have to more than you would want. And that's probably going to be an issue of your comp broke down or you made a user error. And I'll talk about that one also more as we move in. Again, we have NP charge defense here for 3% and a death rate of 18%, so he's actually lower than his class's base amount there. And he is chaotic evil. Now, do keep in mind, too, with regards to alignment, this is what the character thinks of themselves. It's not necessarily how you or I would view it, so just wanted to point that out, because we see a lot of chaotic evil units, and some people question as to, like, why that is. Just keep that in mind. Now, again, looking here on his gender here, he is male. His basic traits are that he is dragon, fae, humanoid, sovereign, riding, servant, and threat to humanity. So you can do a lot here against him. There's a lot of exploitable traits. There's even some that you might be able to buff depending on the units that you're using alongside of him, but it just depends. Now, looking at his overall deck here, like I said, the 0.59 NP gain rate's a little bit concerning. His hit counts are actually all above average, with the exception of his Buster card, which is average at 3. He has a 2-Buster, single arts, double quick deck, so 2B, 2Q, 1A. That being said, I think you're going to run into issues of, hey, we maybe don't have enough arts cards here to generate a lot of Noble Phantasm if we want to get him back to his NP via carding. So that is a concern there. But honestly, given the fact that he's got double Buster and double Quick there, that means he's A, going to be able to perform triple Buster Brave Chains with himself, though there are some concerns with that, and B, that he is going to be able to do some decent star generation for you should you need with his quick cards. So I do like the hit counts overall. I think he's solid here. I probably would have preferred the second arts card over the second quick card, but hey, I'll take it. It's not terrible. Now, looking at his skills, and this was something that when he came out on JP, actually even before he came out, I made a video about Oberon. Some people got angry at me for it, and I wanted to at least explain that a little bit here. The issue at play here is obviously we got him teased via story. We knew his first two skills because, again, we had some idea thanks to the story of that. So I made a video about this because, not to spoil anyone, I didn't talk about his story arc or anything like that or anything involving the character himself, just as a more like PSA and warning that this was coming to the game. And the reason why is because I felt the need to warn people that Oberon was the game's first 70% charger, not 50%. He was going to revolutionize things, and he was going to change the way we thought about 3-turning and change the way that we actually approached charge in comps. And that was one of the big reasons that I wanted to, make everyone aware that that was coming, that, hey, like, this is on the horizon. You need to save. You need to understand that this is going to become meta. And that was why I did that, but I still think some people maybe didn't understand it, and understandably, I guess, got upset with me. Just understand, guys, if I ever make content on a JP servant or a unreleased servant on NA, I will never talk about the story application of that servant. So you're always safe with me in that regard. From there, let's talk about his first skill. So Curtain of the Night EX here ends up being a increase to party's NP damage for 3 turns of 30%. Now, for those of you guys that are aware of, like, say, Waver has this essentially with 30% attack up to the party for 3 turns. Waver has it on a 10% charge skill. This is 20% charge now to the party as well. So that right there is already, it's just Waver skill but better. The other cool part about this is it dabbles with NP damage, which tends to be a rarer buff than attack up. Now, Oberon's going to make you challenge that. And the reason I'm going to say this is normally rarer buffs are better to have for scaling purposes. That is to say, the more of any given buff type you have, the more there is, like, I'm not going to say necessarily diminishing returns, but like you're not getting as much out of the scalability of that. If you take, like, for instance, if you had all Buster and attack buffs, then adding any amount of NP damage to that NP damage will be multiplicative with all of those other damage sources versus adding a little bit more attack or a little bit more card type up. That's just going to be additive with that respective type. So there's a reason why I say that it's sometimes better to just have something you don't have, okay? Now, another way to think about this is, again, going to be the fact that Waver has to use 2 skills to get this. And so Waver would have to use his second skill that is his party-wide defense and 10% charge. So you could maybe give him and say, like, hey, he has a little bit more in his kit than that. But I do think this is something that it bears worth mentioning, that Oberon can do sort of 20% charge and 30% NP damage up for 3 turns with 1 skill. Okay? This is all on a 5-turn cooldown, so relatively low. His third skill here charges 1 ally's NP gauge by 50%. So it's a targetable 50% charge a la Scotty and Koyanskaya. And so it's a very powerful ability just to have that in a nutshell. And so now you guys can see that Oberon can do 20% to your entire front line. And then Oberon can also target one of the units and give them 50%. So this is where we get that 70% charger mantra from. And it's really, really powerful. And the way to think about it is, again, that this is just another way of getting your units to max charge. It's another way of buffing them. And certainly this is an easy way of getting a unit, from a relatively low charge standpoint to their NP. So it's very solid to have this and very good to have Oberon because of how much he opens the doors for chargers. And I've talked about this before, that just between these 2 skills, let's do the whole solve for 300 thing again. And the reason I'm going to point this out is because this is why I made the PSA. This is why Oberon is so revolutionary for a lot of you guys. So let's assume here for a second that you use both of Oberon's 50% charges. That is to say, you have 2 Oberons as supports. And let's say you also have a third 50% charger support. So that could be Reigns, Waver, Scotty, Koyanskaya, you name it. Doesn't matter who it is. Castoria as well. But let's just say that it's 2 Oberons and a third 50% charger. So let's utilize both Oberon's 50% charges right there. That's 100% on the third turn, so you know you have enough charge there, and that's good. Turn 2, what you could do is you could say, hey, now I've used both Oberon's 20% charges. So that'd be 40% for whatever unit's trying to 3-turn. Then we'll also say, hey, maybe we already used the third support's 50% charge here, and that's 50. So right there off your supports, you have 190% charge. And the reason that's significant is because you need 300% charge over 3 turns. I mean, obviously on the right turns, but you need that in order to be able to 3-turn. So the way to understand this is that functionally, as long as you can start out at 100% charge, that could be a super scope, that could be a normal K scope and an append, right? Then under those circumstances, you would only need 10% charge here on wave 2 in order to be able to 3-turn. Once Oberon comes into the game, any unit that can charge 10% can be made to 3-turn. And that is really strong. That's why I made the PSA, because I realized the bar just went way lower for who can actually 3-turn in the game. This is a huge change. And again, with something like double Koyanskaya, this made it so that 30% chargers could be able to start out from as low as a 50% charge CE. This allowed, again, numerous other hybrid comps to come into fruition. For instance, a double Oberon comp himself can do stuff like, and so now imagine instead of this being 3 waves, that this is 3 units. So essentially, if this is an Oberon, this is an Oberon, and let's say this is a Koyanskaya, okay? Your Oberon could use basically the 20% charge across the board for everyone. The other Oberon could use the 20% charge across the board for everyone. Each of the Oberons could use their targeted 50% up on themselves. Your Koyanskaya could use her targeted 50% up on herself. And each one of these units is 10% shy from being able to NP. It is easily solved by either unlocking their mana loading, or you could just have Koyanskaya's mana loading unlocked and NP with her on turn 1, and that would get them 10% charge to be able to 3-turn. So you can start out all 3 of those units from 0, and this is like a hybrid comp, but it actually is just using 3 supports, and it can be made to do decent damage depending on the NP levels of an Oberon. So it's something to consider nonetheless, that there's some really weird things that you can do with the charge here, and that's why it's so significant. That's why this is such a game changer, is that this opens the doors not just for 1 unit to 3-turn, but for all sorts of mix and match scenarios. So that's just based off the 50% charge, but there's more to the skill, and that's something that you guys need to pay attention to. So the issue with the skill, and the question that I get all the time is, hey, what do you do about the 20% drain 1 turn later that this skill imparts? Well, if you guys saw that 3-turn scenario, I basically said use those 50% charges turn 3. You see, there's 2 scenarios where you don't care when you use this skill. Scenario number 1 is we don't care if we use it in the 3rd turn of a 3-turn. As long as you clear on that 3rd turn, you don't care that it would have drained you at like in the 4th turn at that point. You completed the node, you're good. It's going to still fire the animation after the fact, and that will slow your run down just slightly, but you don't actually care. It's not going to interfere with your ability to do something. Scenario number 2 is if the unit is Buster and isn't like Artoria or one of the Saber Faces. They're not someone that gets NP after their NP. So as long as they don't charge after the NP, like a Buster system style of unit, they don't dabble in refund period. So draining them when they're already at 0 does nothing to them. So then it doesn't matter what turn you use it on. Just keep in mind that, like, again, you could have a Koyan Sky or something like that that's charging the party after her NP, so be careful with how you use it. Be aware that this is a thing, but yeah, as long as you try to stick it to turn 3 and stuff like that, it ends up not being that big of an issue. On top of this, though, even though this does have a demerit, hey, there's a really cool aspect to this, and that's that it gives you a crit star bomb of 20 stars. For those of you guys that are already enjoying using Koyanskaya, you'll denote that her second skill gives you stars as well. This is why nowadays, for Buster comps, we don't care about stars anymore. We have stars on demand, pretty much. We have them in an easy way to manufacture them at will on any turn that we could foreseeably need them on. So, yeah, the fact that both big farming meta supports have star bombs in their kit is just nutty and just makes Buster not care, because Buster can crit whenever it needs to then. Now, I will say it's only 20, and that's something you'll have to keep in mind, that it may not be enough to get 100% on one card. It may not be enough to happen right at the right time, especially given the fact that you're going to have to pay heed to this drain, but still really, really good, really solid. So to me, it's something that I think you guys will enjoy having here. Just keep in mind that it does have the drain. And this is all on a 6-turn cooldown. Now his third skill here, this is the doozy. We did not know about this skill, you know, when we got him teased, when we were able to, like, experience him some. So I was already theorizing that he might get some sort of additional buff, additional steroid here. I could not have predicted this. And in fact, when we found out what Oberon's third skill was here, it was insane. I still cannot, to this day, believe that they ended up putting this buff in the way it is. Allow me to explain. So, and this is a little bit of a misnomer here. It's not really a misnomer, but I think it's a source of confusion for people. So, this skill starts out by buffing one ally's Buster performance for 1 turn by 50%. That right there is strong, okay? A lot of people think of Oberon as a Buster unit because of this. Now, his NP is Buster, so sure, you could make that argument. And he does give a Buster buff here, so you have that argument. But the issue at play is that what Oberon does is so valuable, regardless of this, that you don't care that he has it. Oberon, without this buff, would already be the strongest third support for every card type, barring weird niches that come into play. You can have scenarios where refund is an issue and you might want to go with another, like, art unit or something, or Nero Bride or something like that. But when we're just talking flat damage added, unless it's like unless it's like Caster Martha, who comes out later, who's giving a lot of, like, you know, anti-divine and stuff like that, or anti-demonic and stuff like that, that realistically, actually, I think that one's demon still, but I don't know. As long as that's not coming into play, you should be relatively sure that this is going to be one of the highest damage amplifiers that you can get in the game. And here's why. It's not from the Buster buff. It's from this. Grant them NP damage up boost for 1 turn. This is what is so broken about Oberon. This is what blew the doors off of damage in FGO, and this is why you have started to see 90++ content. You can thank Oberon for this. When Oberon gets released into the game, the devs seemingly don't bring him back for a long time, protect him mightily because of that, because they almost seem to really quickly catch on to, like, oh wow, Oberon provides so much damage now to the party that he has supplanted Waver and Reigns in terms of effective damage increase while still being a 70% charger. Oberon opens up the doors to NP1s being able to do the vast majority of the game. You don't need higher MP levels when you have Oberon. The only content that I think you'll see where you do is in challenge scenarios, or again, 90++ content. And just a quick aside about 90++, you don't have to do it. A lot of the times there are benefits to doing 90++, but they're very minimal. They're very tangential, and it comes down to account specific considerations. So you don't really have to worry if you ever have to step down and not do a 90++. You can just do 90+ instead, and you will find yourself perfectly adequate for a lot of those scenarios. So For everything else other than the 90++, Oberon's just opening the door to that NP1 unit you have actually doing solid damage. And that's something I think you guys are really going to get surprised by, is the actual numbers flying on your screen when you see this. So what MP damage boost does is, again, for one turn, you are going to multiply the value of NP damage up, and it is unstackable. And that unstackable is a big point that I'm going to come back to here. But at rank 10 of the skill, that multiplies it by 100. So this doubles NP damage on your unit. Now, here's the deal. What does this include? Does this include just that unit's NP damage? No. This includes that unit's extra NP damage boosts. So again, this is specifically talking about sources of NP damage up. So buffs, right? Not, hey, the actual damage a unit does with their NP. This obviously modifies that, but it's not talking about that. It's talking about the buffs. Any source of this buff counts. A unit's own kit, their skills, their passives count. A unit's support buffs, so buffs coming from another unit, like Oberon's 30% NP damage up here for 3 turns, also counts for this. A unit's Mystic Code buff that, let's say, it gives a 50% NP damage up for 1 turn, counts for this. And possibly the most broken thing, a unit's Craft Essence buff that gives NP damage up also counts for this. So any source of NP damage up is doubled when you have this skill at rank 10. That is how strong it is, just for 1 turn though. Now, this is unstackable, which means if you run double Oberon, you don't get this effect twice, and it's pretty clear why. This would actually pretty much destroy any sort of semblance of damage balance in this game if they allowed it. So you can use double Oberon, and you can use their 3rd skill twice on the same unit if you utilize both their buffs on that same unit. What you won't get is you won't get a second version of the NP damage boost, but you will get a second version of the Buster up. So there might still be a reason to use it if you're using a Buster unit. Now, the downside to this is this skill. This effect here. This has a 500% chance to grant them a delayed debuff for 1 time. It's treated as a buff, and it ignores debuff resistance and immunity. So, what does that mean? This means that it is not considered a debuff. Okay? That is to say, you can't stop it from landing on you. Now, some of you smarter individuals out there may go, well, Cat, I'm pretty smart. I bet I can come up with a way. I bet I can utilize like buff block and somehow manage to land buff block on my own unit, and that would stop this harmful buff from applying. You would be wrong. You cannot stop it, even with buff block. We've tested it. So keep that in mind. There's really only one way to stop this, and you'll see why here, why you might want to. Because essentially, it gives you this delayed debuff for 1 time. At the end of the turn here, it's going to have a 1000% chance to remove all of their buffs and then put them to sleep eternally. And what I mean when I say eternal, I mean eternal. They will not wake up for the duration of that run. Period. They are dead to you. You cannot do anything with them once that sleep buff lands. So, the only thing that they can do is die. That's it. They are totally bricked. It's uncleansable, unremovable, infinitely lasting. The only way to get it off, end the run, and then from there, when the run is over, your unit will no longer be asleep. But only once the node finishes will your unit not be asleep. For the duration of that run, your unit will remain asleep. So, again, it says it's similar to stun, but unlike stun, this status will again ignore debuff resistance and immunity, and the affected target would be unable to be selected as a sacrifice. What does that mean? This means you cannot Qin Gong the unit once they are asleep. You can't even get them killed if you want to. Also, you cannot substitute them with Plug Suit, with Order Change. So Miss Crane won't work either. You cannot get rid of them, okay? It will also give the slept unit a a 500% chance to draw attention of all enemies by 300% for 3 turns. So it's a 3-turn taunt on them once they go to sleep. The good news is the unit is bricked. It's asleep. It can't do anything for you. So at least it can soak up some damage and will potentially get killed and get out of the party. The bad problem is if your unit lives longer than 3 turns, like in the case of Buntoria whenever I've messed the skill up, yeah, they ain't gonna die. And as a result, then they won't have taunt. And I've actually had scenarios where the last unit standing was my bricked unit. It's not a good scenario to run into, okay? So be very careful with how you use this skill is what I will say. But again, the long story short here is there's really only one way to avoid this buff. Kill your unit first. So, classic example of this. Put this 3rd skill on a unit like Arash. Arash will go up, fire off his NP, and die on his own turn. And thus the sleep buff can't apply. He won't get slept because he's dead. So that's the only way around it. The unit must be dead. Otherwise, it will apply and brick the unit. This is why you want to use Oberon in a 3-turn. When you start getting outside of this, you basically have a tough choice to make. You either don't use this or you use it to try and sacrifice a unit. And I don't mean sacrifice like the Qingong sacrifice. I mean sacrifice like you know they're just going to become a brick and that they're just going to get a taunt and they're probably going to die. Here's something you guys really need to pay attention to. Whenever you're farming in a buster system and you use Oberon, do not, I repeat, do not, look into my eyes right now, do not press this skill on the wrong turn. You will brick your unit, your run will be horrific, and remember when I talked about having to card with Oberon? That's where you'll have to card with Oberon, and it ain't fun. You don't want to do that. You don't want to have to sit there and limp to an NP and end up taking 7 to like 12 turns to get through the 3-turn node because you did an oopsie. So be very careful with when you activate this skill. Otherwise, you're going to end up paying for it. So again, to make a long story short, to sum up this skill, it gives you 50% buster up for 1 turn. It will also grant the target double NP damage boost, okay? If you have it at rank 10. And then it's going to brick the unit and put them to sleep 1 turn later. And there's nothing you can do to stop it short of getting them killed first. Savvy? All of this on an 8-turn cooldown, so thankfully you ain't getting back to it very fast anyways. That is his kit in a nutshell. So he's a 70% charger, and the big thing to keep in mind about this, especially with regards to the NP damage boost, is that due to the fact that he gives the 30% NP damage up here, this means that Oberon gives the entire party, and let's say this is turn 1, this is turn 2, and this is turn 3. Oberon gives the entire party, and I'm just going to focus mostly on a like devoted damage dealer here. He will give them 30% NP damage, 30% NP damage, and 60% NP damage here. So just based off this alone, you can already see that this is stronger than, say, a Reigns that would give 40, 40, and 40. Okay? Now, actually, this is the exact same amount as Reigns. Reigns has it spread evenly across all 3 turns. That may be better for you, okay? But if the unit's Buster, Oberon's going to win that one anyways, okay? And if not, maybe we only care really about the damage on the 3rd turn. So at that point, Oberon does end up as a better option for you. And then there's Waver, who does 30, 30, and 30, but he does it to the entire party like he does. So he breaks even with Waver in terms of damage potential, unless you're doing something like using Waver's NP. And if you're using Waver's NP, then you can use Reigns' NP, and you can use Oberon's NP, and we haven't gotten to that yet. So keep in mind that, yeah, Oberon just ends up being functionally the best neutral support in the game, because he really ends up stacking damage on the turn that you probably need it, and ends up breaking even on all other turns with everybody else pretty much. So yeah, that's just why, again, he ends up being so strong. Even throwing out the Buster Up, he ends up, you know, being that good. So this is a huge jump forward in terms of potential capability. Now, let's take a look at his passives here. He increases party debuff success rate by 10% against enemies except foreigner enemies while self is on the field. So party's more likely to land debuffs except against foreigners. He has a 500% chance to reduce the buff success rate of Merlin allies by 20% while self is on the field. And again, this is literally Merlin. I'm trying to remember if Proto Merlin qualifies for this. I believe she does, but chat can tell me if I'm wrong on that. Here's the thing about this. This is only while Oberon is on the field. So Oberon and Merlin must both be on the field at the same time to have this demerit. And all this would mean is that there's a 20% chance that whenever Merlin utilizes a skill, that it could fail. It would just not succeed. So that's kind of a problem. So maybe don't use Oberon and Merlin at the exact same time. But if you were to say plug suit an Oberon for a Merlin, you'd still be perfectly fine. They just can't be on the field at the exact same time. And otherwise, you're perfectly fine. But next up here is Territory Creation E-. This is, again, Art's performance up of 1.5%. He kind of needs this, and I'm okay with it. It's just a rather weak one. He ends up with Item Construction A+ of a debuff success rate of an additional 11%. Again, Oberon doesn't really dabble too much in debuffs other than to you, so don't have to worry about that too much. And Riding A for an additional quick performance of 10%. Again, this is actually really nice. This actually does help his quick card performance, so more stars, more damage. Definitely a good one for him to have. And then Midsummer Night's Dream EX. This will grant him Curse debuff immunity. He cannot be cursed. That's actually really strong in certain scenarios. And on top of that, he is immune to the mental debuffs here. So the mental debuffs are, for instance, stuff like Charm, stuff like Terror, again, Sleep even, but not his own sleep. If you guys remember, it's a purple sleep. It's not included in this. So keep that in mind that this is the like normal removable sleep that he is immune to, not his own. So if he puts his third skill on himself, he's still bricking himself, chat, a turn later. You ain't getting out of that one. The reason I keep bringing it up is because this is always the questions that I get asked about Oberon. Can you avoid it doing this? Can you avoid it doing that? The answer is no, you can't. It's the easy way to think about it. So let's talk pen skills here. And I'm going to tell you flat out, mana loading is exactly what you want. You at least want it unlocked for that exact scenario I proposed to you, that, hey, like a double Oberon and like, you know, Koyanskaya or like, you know, any other 50% charger can be made to each handle a wave themselves. So it's really, really nice. But surely, yeah, if you manage to actually end up maxing it out, this could just mean getting him to his NP even easier. And you may find scenarios where, like, yeah, you actually needed to limp to an Oberon NP, or maybe you were going to use an Oberon NP to help you clear a wave. That is another concern. His third one here is anti-caster attack damage aptitude. This is not good for him because since he's sort of the inverse of an alter ego, he doesn't do too hot against the cavalry triangle. Instead, he gets kind of messed up by them. So you're not really going to be trying to utilize him against casters if you can help it. And his extra attack finesse, well, like I said, if you end up in an Oberon solo at some point, you might want this. But so I'm going to tell you guys pretty much go with the second append, then the first, and then the third as a very distant third. Now, let's talk his Noble Phantasm here. His Noble Phantasm is an AoE 4-hit Buster damage dealing NP. It deals damage first, then removes all of the enemy's offensive buffs. This is kind of nice. This gets rid of stuff like Invuln Pierce and, again, any sort of like nasty crit buffs. So really, really good. This can actually help sort of lock down an enemy and debilitate them and stop them from pumping damage against you. However, this is also going to sleep the enemy. Now, you will denote this is the pink sleep. This is not his sleep from his third skill. This is a removable sleep. It lasts one turn. But if you hit the enemy, it will awaken them. So this can be good for stalling out an enemy, preventing them from NPing in a turn. Again, just making so that they're not able to like card you or crit you that turn. So you can utilize this as sort of a prevention mechanic on top of it being a damage dealing NP. However, it's then going to imply invincibility for one turn to them. Demerit. It will make your enemies invincible after you use it. So you need to be careful with how you utilize this. For most people, they choose to do like cards before the NP. Then the problem is if you have like a Brave Chain, you ain't getting the extra attack. Or if you try to follow up Oberon's NP with someone else's NP that doesn't have Invuln Pierce, it ain't hitting. Or if you try to utilize Oberon's NP and then follow it up with someone's cards, it ain't hitting. Not unless they have Invuln Pierce. So keep that in mind. This is the tricky part about Oberon's NP. Now, you might be thinking, well, Cad, I could just Invuln Pierce. It's true, you could, but if you Invuln Pierce and you hit them, then you got rid of the benefit of that sleep status. They are going to wake up from that and still get to act on their turn. So you can, it's a choice to make. You can go for more damage that same turn and use Oberon's NP as sort of a setup, or you can use Oberon's NP as sort of a bookend right at the end of your turn to put them to sleep and make it so that they don't get to act. Choice is yours. Up to you to determine how you do it. His overcharge effect is that he actually deals super effective damage here to lawful alignment enemies. So just with his NP will do more damage to lawful alignment enemies. Kind of nice. There's not a whole lot of extra damage against lawful enemies in the game. So fairly useful trick in his kit here. So again, I do think that Oberon's NP can be utilized quite effectively. Now, let's talk damage for Oberon. There's only been 5 pretenders, and the 5th one's not depicted here because it's a support NP. So taking a quick look at this, of these, only one is single target, and that's Hephaestion. Hephaestion is going to end up coming actually next year with the Elmaloy Case Files rerun, but I digress. So taking a look at this, you guys can already see something. Oberon is clearing away the victor in terms of damage for the AoE department here. But keep in mind what this NP spreadsheet is. 1, it's neutral damage. 2, it assumes a character's own buffs, and only their own buffs are on them. So no external sources of buffs. But that would also mean that this is Oberon with his 3rd skill activated. So his damage without that 3rd skill is probably a lot further south. Now, if you include his damage with his 3rd skill activated, and its lawful alignment, yeah, he doesn't do bad damage. Here's the thing. 1, Tlaloc here is not going to be coming for a long time is what I'm going to say. And at that point, she's also just a normal 4-star. You're not going to get, guaranteed 5 copies. But Eliza's a welfare. You will get 5 copies. Eliza's a long ways off, but you can see this certainly rivals Oberon. However, again, this is the same deal with her. She's also utilizing all of her own buffs on herself to reach these numbers. So, again, you don't have to have Oberon as your AoE pretender, but you're probably going to be waiting a while to get an AoE pretender if you don't grab Oberon. And there are some kind of annoying nodes that they like to throw in the game after Oberon's existence that involve alter egos, where, yeah, you could try to get away with it using a Berserker. Certainly possible, but otherwise, you're probably going to want a pretender. So Oberon can be really useful for those scenarios. You don't have to go for multiple MP levels of him. That's up to you. But hey, I am going to say that Oberon is one of those units to me that really does make a lot of sense if you want to go after higher NP levels of him as a support, because that NP can be useful to you. Again, you can make do with NP1 for plenty of content. I've never really lamented only having NP1 on my JP account, but there are times where, yeah, if you had a higher MP level, you could get away with more, or it might be easier on you. So just keep that in mind. Now, again, I think it bears worth mentioning that this is, like I said, with his 3rd skill active. So his numbers go a lot further south here, but hey, it is what it is. So trying to pump higher NP levels of him will significantly help his damage, but if you don't want to utilize that 3rd skill on him, that's going to be your issue that you're going to run into. So trying to maybe use him to clear an early wave would be potentially better. But hey, it just depends what you're trying to do. Now, remember what I said about craft essences. Oberon's third skill applies to even the NP damage from craft essences. So this 80% buff becomes a 160% NP buff with his third skill active on the unit using Black Grail. That is insanely strong. Black Grail was already the game's highest damage boosting craft essence, and it got doubled by Oberon. This is why I was just truly shocked that the devs made Oberon as strong as they did. I really feel like they did not think this one through very well. In fact, even if you had just reined in the ability for it to apply to craft essences, that would have tempered it quite significantly. But hey, they went for it, and kudos to them. We now get to see funny numbers because of it. So yes, utilizing Black Grail on units that are targeted by Oberon is really good, but you can also use this on Oberon. Like we already talked about, if you put Oberon into like some sort of weird double Oberon setup and use his own buffs on himself, yeah, he can get to his own NP, and you can do some really funny stuff with that. From there, if you're trying to actually deal damage with him, but you maybe don't want to go as hard in the paint, something like Aerial Drive's not bad. You guys are going to get another crack at this during the Halloween event this year, where old Halloween craft essences will actually come back into the shop, and you will be able to get all 5 copies of them. Highly recommend don't missing out on that event. So this one could be a really, really strong one, because again, it's got NP damage of 10%. So how Oberon's going to really affect the game for a lot of you guys, you're going to start really wanting craft essences that maybe have like starting charge and NP damage on them, because you know Oberon is going to double boost any source of that. That means that functionally any source of NP damage on the right turn counts for double. It's really strong. And again, this one's all attack scaling. Now, there is an even better one though that you guys are going to get next year. Early next year when we get the collab event, the Bunyan Super Bunyan event, you guys are going to end up getting Cranking. This is another welfare CE that you guys will be guaranteed to get 5 copies of. And this one is starting battle at 50% gauge, Buster card by 8% instead of the 10% of Aerial Drive, but NP damage of 15%. So instead of 10%, you got 15. So you lost 2% card type up, but you gained 5% NP damage up. And with Oberon, that 5% gets doubled. So you can utilize this again on Oberon or again on any units that are getting targeted by Oberon. And yes, it is all attack scaling. From there, what happens if you maybe want to try to pierce the veil? You maybe want to try to get through his invuln on his NP and actually deal damage to the units. Maybe utilize his NP and then cards, or his NP and then someone else's NP. I'm not going to say you're going to want to do this too often, but should this scenario arise, Honey Lake could be really strong, particularly on Oberon himself if you're trying to get him to deal more damage. But obviously this one's going to be tempered by a unit's burn immunity, or really just debuff immunity or resistance. But certainly you could throw on burn command codes to help yourself to some additional 40% extra damage. So this one could be really nice. It's a really good damage boosting CE that also gives you invuln pierce, and it is all attack scaling. Sadly, if you don't have Honey Lake at this point, you're not really going to have another opportunity to get it. So what do you do if you don't have it? Well, there's a number of other scenarios that you could go through. This is Sweet Crystal. This is a craft essence that's actually available to you in the Rare Prism shop. Now, before you go run and buy it, do understand, it costs 5 Rare Prisms per copy, making this a whopping 25 Rare Prisms in order to MLB this. However, it is a good CE. It ignores invincibility and has 50% starting charge in MLB, and it's all attack scaling. It's from an old Valentine's event. If you have Rare Prisms lying around to spare, this is an amazing CE. If you don't, or you're on a budget, don't buy it. There are numerous other invuln pierce CEs. Now, there are plenty that you can use, but I'm going to talk about 2 upcoming ones that you guys might want to pay attention to. One of these is Valentine Witches. This will actually happen for next year's Valentine's event coming up on NA. And this one is going to have Ignore Invincibility, NP damage of 25%, so again, that could be double boosted with Oberon, and NP gen of 10%. Don't really care too much about the NP gen, especially with Buster units, but hey, I'm going to say that the rest of this right here is actually pretty solid, and again, it is all attack scaling. This one, however, is a limited craft essence. It is a gotcha CE, so you're not going to be guaranteed to get 5 copies of this, but hey, if you guys see yourself rolling for Bazette, you might find yourself the proud owner of an MLB version of this. And then Retirement from the Underworld. This one is, again, another limited one, and this one came from Guda Guda Shin Yamatai Koku. So this one's going to be essentially next year's new Gouda event. Not this year's, not Gouda 6. We have Gouda 5 rerun, and Gouda 6 is here. It's going to be Gouda 7. So next year, at the end of next year, you get an all-attack scaling CE that, again, is Ignore Invincibility, Buster Performance of 5%, and NP Damage of 20%. So, again, that could be double. Really, really nice option for you there in the Invul and Pierce department. But, again, this one's limited. It's gotcha. You're not going to get all 5 copies guaranteed, so it just depends on whether or not you want to roll. So, again, I do think there's a lot that you can do with Oberon. Oberon's a very solid unit and someone that I think can really do a lot for you in the long run. I highly recommend every single one of you taking the time to consider whether or not he's worth it for you. Because Oberon is that good and that meta-defining of a unit. He absolutely amps the damage in the game and really raises the threshold for what units can do. That alone bears worth consideration. Plus, given the fact that he's not going to return for 18 months, and given the fact that he's the game's first pretender, I think there's some extra considerations here for why you should want to roll for him. It's not the end of the world if you don't get him, but he's definitely that good that all of you should sit down and consider it. So again, let me know what you guys think about Oberon, and whether or not you guys think that he's going to be the savior of some of your favorite units. And I will be sure to read your comments, and I will see you guys for the next video. Have a good one.